Dr. Money, in 1999, as president of Abilene Christian University, you made a confession and extended an apology to African American leaders within Churches of Christ on behalf of the university for something that had ended 4 decades before, that being the university's prohibition of American black students enrolling. That was a policy that was there from the beginning of the university in 1906 through 1962. Before we get into what you said in the apology and what you hoped the implications would be, even symbolically, take us back to the genesis of the conversations that even led to the apology in the first place.
Well, as you know, Grant, and as you have said, that had been a situation for a long time. In 1950s, there began to be federal legislation, as you know, about civil rights, some pretty strident and forceful legislation that was passed down both by the courts and by the Congress. The administration was still trying to figure out how to implement the integration process. It finally took place, as you said, in 1960s. But that is the type of thing that does not go away in a decade. It does not go away in 40 or 50 years. It actually existed within our own country for several hundred years. And so things move rather slowly.
In the 1990s, you were president of Abilene Christian University, and you were interested in ACU's student body population diversifying. Take us through some of those conversations you had with African American leaders in that time and your desire to see ACU diversify in terms of its ethnic population.
I had a real passion for this. It came to me as a young man. I was very convicted by the fact that a lot of this went right by me when I was a teenager. When I was even at ACU, it went right by me. Some of my great mentors in Washington, D.C. when I was a young minister were African American ministers. And my church was fully integrated, my first church. And so this began to build. And when I became president, our enrollment percentages of African American students and on the faculty and staff was really low. And so I made a promise to myself and to others that we would really address this in an assertive way. So I began to meet with black leaders, and one of those meetings was in 1998 in Dallas. I pulled some ministers together and I said, tell me what I need to know. And they were very honest with me. But out of that, they said, we think there ought to be a kind of a summit meeting the following year, which would have been 1999. And let's talk about some of the larger issues involved, not just one specific issue of recruiting students for ACU.
You called the meeting, and as you say, you expressed a desire to hear the unvarnished truth.
And I did.
And you did. What were some of those conversations like?
We had a Thursday night meeting. There were about 30 of us, about 15 people from ACU, about 15 African American leaders. The meeting Thursday night was open. It was open to the press. Some national press heard about this and showed up. But I decided to close the meeting on Friday because we wanted to have total candor. And so I did not let the press in on Friday. We spent the morning talking about the problems and listing them on the board, and we ran out of board space. Then we had lunch together and we said, the afternoon will be devoted to the solutions. What do we do next? And out of that came a prayer session, and I just said after we prayed for a little bit, I don't know what to do next.
And you opened it to the room. What can
we were in
I
a
do
circle.
next?
We were in a circle, and after about 30 seconds of silence, Dr. Tony Roach said, I suppose you can begin with an apology. Oh, the heads began to nod. And he verbalized what was in that room, and I hadn't quite grasped that.
Did you get a sense of why they wanted to hear an apology?
I think that was a significant statement that they could hold on to and say, from here on, things have a possibility of being really different. This is a place we can put down a stake and we can say, we had this discussion and we asked something of ACU, and ACU responded in a positive way.
And then, of course, you aren't just doing this as Dr. Royce Money. You're doing it as the president of an institution that at the time had been around almost 100 years. Did you feel like you were simply observing that something had happened that was wrong? Did you feel that you were taking some ownership personally of it?
Okay.
Does a person have to take ownership to apologize?
Well, I think in a sense you have to, but in no way is what I did a reflection, a negative reflection on people in generations past. I know that there were many people who were offended by this going back decades into the history of Abilene Christian, of society in general. So it's easy to make generalizations. It's easy to condemn people of past generations for the decisions they made, but sometimes we completely ignore the context in which they made it. And so I'm not passing judgment on them. I am saying I am passing judgment on myself if I refuse to do something that I have an opportunity to correct. That's all I was doing. And so I can only speak for myself. I'm not interested in condemning any other generation. I'm simply saying a group of my black brothers, when I asked them, what do I do next, said, you could start with an apology. My initial response was, the chairman of the board is here. There are a couple of other board members. Dr. Prentice Metter was there. Don Crisp was there. And I said, I can't make that decision. That has to be a decision of the board. But I am telling you that I'm willing to do it if the board so directs. And within a few days, the board unanimously affirmed my request. And then second question was, where do you do it? And they said, well, we have a 50th anniversary of Southwestern Christian College coming up in Terrell, Texas. That's going to be a large gathering of African-American church leaders, and that would be a great place to do it. And I agreed to do it. It was in November of 1999. And there's a lot of symbolism, Grant, connected to that. Went over there. Who would be on the stage as chairman of the board but Dr. Fred Gray, the noted civil rights attorney who represented Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. He's the chairman of the board. And I got over there and supposed to wear my regalia, had left my hood in Abilene. A few years earlier, we had given Dr. Jack Evans, the president of Southwestern Christian, an honorary doctorate. And I said, Jack, can I borrow your hood? and so the hood that I wore when I made the apology belonged to Dr. Jack Evans, the president.
You mentioned the symbolism. It is interesting. We're closing, well, we're not just closing a year. We're closing a year, a decade, a century, a millennium. There is a turning of the page. And your perspective was so unique. You enrolled at ACU in 1960.
Pretty oblivious.
In the whites, in the non-American black era.
Yeah.
And by the time you graduated, you were graduating with Larry Bonner and Billy Curl. And so you had that perspective. How much of that perspective did you draw on as you began to think about what exactly you were going to say in that apology?
I had written out the statement, but I literally went in that situation not knowing what was going to happen. What I wanted to do was to make sure I apologized. And I wanted to make sure I asked for forgiveness. And I said a part of forgiveness is a resolve to do something differently. And so my commitment to them was, we'll do something differently. Now, you could hear a pin drop when I got up there. You could hear a pin drop, and I was scared to death.
This wasn't a long address. This was
no, it was two or three paragraphs.
2 or 3 paragraphs. And yet every word, because it was smaller, every word seemed to carry more weight.
I worked for hours on it.
Really?
Yeah, and I had editors look at it. 2 or 3 people I trusted. I wanted every word to count. So that's probably the most time I've spent on a 2 or 3 paragraph statement that in my life. As I got toward the last paragraph, I began to hear a rumbling, some vocal amens, praise the Lord, hallelujah. And before I could finish, the audience broke out in applause, cheers, and stood up for what seemed like to be a long time. And I just kind of wept.
Even if the vast majority agree that the policy should have ended long before 1962, it shouldn't have ever started. But even if you could get everyone to agree on that, I don't think you would have unanimity in saying, well, Dr. Royce Money in 1999 ought to apologize for something that he had no control over when he was a student
In other words,
the early 1960s.
Yeah, what business was it of mine to
Why should
apologize on the part of former generations?
Why should someone apologize for something he or she didn't do?
Look at apartheid in South Africa. People were apologizing who didn't get it started. They inherited it, but they didn't get it started. But somebody had to stand up and say, this is enough, this is wrong. And we need to admit that it's wrong. Look at Germany, post-Nazi Germany. Look at what the Americans did to U.S. citizens who were Japanese descent, who were put in internment camps in the U.S. One in my hometown, Temple, Texas. And later on, the United States apologized for that. The Pope just recently apologized to the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church for the division. It happened over 1,000 years ago. And so I think we have to think contextually. We can't just say, now, this is me, and I don't have anything to do with the past. I don't have any responsibility. I don't have anything to do with it. This is just me. I'm going to start from right now because you have inherited, I've inherited so much garbage. We have to be discerning and sift through it and say, what did I inherit that was right and good and true? And what did I inherit that really needs to be dumped overboard? And so there was all that going on within my own self.
You told me that one of your colleagues, another president of a Christian university, whispered something to you before you went on stage.
He said, we all should be going with you. But I went by myself. The good news is that event, I think, was a catalyst, maybe an inspiration, I hope, for other institutions to pay attention, to issue apologies in some cases, to make right as best they can some of the injustices that were perpetrated even after integration. And so I think we're in a different day today. And I just rejoice in that. In the last 15 years, you look at the gains that have been made. There's so much more to do. And so I hesitate even to rejoice too much because there's so much to do ahead. But at least the ball is moving. At least we're going in the right direction.
There's something else powerful, I think, about a moment like November of '99. It serves as an opportunity to be held accountable later.
That's right. Yeah, you drive it down and say, okay, now hold us accountable. And we've got to have that in life. We've got to have those kind of moments. It seems to me, as a man who tries to practice Christian faith, that we have to be welcoming to everybody, regardless of their background. And so we don't have the privilege of being privileged. That is not in the Christian ethic. And so I thank God that He allowed us to have that moment. But I do also pray that we don't rest on that moment. If anything, that moment is a call to involvement and a call to make our society what it was intended to be and all it can be, and that is everybody marching together.
Abilene Christian University has been a Christian institution of higher education for over 90 years. Its doors were not open to African American students for well over half the time. We are here today to confess the sins of racism and discrimination, to issue a formal apology, to express regret to all of you, and to ask for your forgiveness.